Welcome back everybody, I'm Gérann Gerber, your host, and today I'm going to react to a video called The Untold Tragedy of Darth Bane. Now for new updates and content you can visit the links in the description down below, and let's get started. Enjoy.
Darth Bane was not always the powerful Sith we know him as today, because his disturbing story actually started with him being just a beaten miner's son named Des on a Patros. Des was 18 years old when his father, Hurst, attacked him in a drunken rage, cracking his ribs with brutal punches. But that night, something inside Des finally broke. Suddenly, power rushed through him, even though he had never touched his father. Then, as Des imagined Hurst's heart stopping, it actually did stop beating. Hurst fell down dead from a heart attack. Des stood there for several minutes, completely unable to understand what had just happened. But this was only the first time the Force would save him, and it wouldn't be the last. 5 years later, Des was still working the Catorsis mines when everything suddenly changed. A Republic soldier started a fight with Des in a cantina, and Des killed him in self-defense. His alien friend Groshik then helped him escape before Republic forces could arrest him. So Groshik smuggled Des off-world to join the Sith Brotherhood of Darkness army as his only choice left. Des became a foot soldier in the Gloom Walkers unit, where his strange abilities quickly became clear. While other soldiers struggled to hit moving targets, Des always knew exactly where the targets would be before they got there. During hand-to-hand fighting practice, his reflexes and intuition gave him an edge in combat. Plus, he showed amazing strength from his mining background along with weird reflexes that made him extremely dangerous in combat. This and all following information are drawn from Drew Karpyshyn's Darth Bane trilogy. We highly recommend the books.
Yes.
The first mission. After 6 months with the Gloomwalkers, Des's unit got sent to Facera. The planet was a Republic manufacturing world with a heavily defended capital city. Also, the Sith forces had been ordered to capture an important Republic outpost as part of a larger attack on the planet. His company had to attack the Republic position through a killing field. However, as they prepared to move forward, Des felt something was terribly wrong because his skin prickled with warning, so he could sense the attack plan would fail badly. Des tried to warn Lieutenant Ulabor about the deadly plan, but the officer wouldn't listen. He cared more about following orders than protecting soldiers' lives. So before the attack could begin at dawn, Des made his choice. He hit Ulabor with a single punch, knocking the lieutenant completely unconscious before he could give the order to charge. Taking command right away, Des led the Gloomwalkers away from the killing field. Instead of trying a frontal attack, he waited until nightfall and then guided them through a ravine that gave them cover on the enemy's side. They crawled through mud and darkness, moving quietly toward the Republic position. The defenders were clearly expecting a daylight attack from the front, not a night raid from behind. When Des and his soldiers finally came out behind enemy lines, he let loose power he didn't even know he had. The dark side flowed through him, guiding his aim while also making his body stronger. Even when a flash grenade temporarily blinded him, Des could still sense the Republic soldiers through the Force. In just seconds, he killed the remaining defenders with impossible accuracy. His squad completely overwhelmed the Republic position from behind, while the defenders were caught totally off guard. As a result, they successfully captured the outpost with few casualties, since only 9 soldiers from Des's unit died in the attack. The victory should have earned Des major recognition, yet Ulabor simply reported him for mutiny and hitting a superior officer after waking up. Des would have been executed for striking an officer. Luckily, Lord Khopesh of the Brotherhood of Darkness stepped in at the last moment. Lord Khopesh was a purple-skinned Twi'lek with burning orange eyes that glowed strangely in the darkness. He had heard about Des's unusual abilities during the battle. Such power was extremely rare. The dark side clearly flowed through Des like a river. Khopesh offered Des a simple choice between coming to the Sith Academy on Korriban for training or facing execution for mutiny. The journey to Korriban took several weeks through hyperspace. Des learned that the Brotherhood of Darkness controlled huge territories across the galaxy, though the Republic deliberately hid this truth from its citizens. Plus, this new Sith Empire was totally different from the old ones. Lord Khan had united all Sith as equals, ending the infighting that had destroyed previous empires. Meanwhile, Des listened carefully, already sensing something deeply wrong with this idea. The Academy's secrets. Korriban was truly a planet of death. The surface was nothing but red sand and black rock, with huge statues of ancient Sith lords carved into mountains. The Valley of the Dark Lords stretched for miles, completely filled with pyramids and tombs. Plus, the dark side was so strong there that Des could actually feel it pressing against his mind like a living thing, constantly whispering promises of power. The Sith Academy was built right into a mountain, its entrance being a huge arch covered in warnings written in the ancient Sith language. Inside, stone hallways constantly echoed with footsteps, while ancient symbols covered every wall. The air itself was really thick with dark side energy, making it hard for new students to breathe. Plus, the heavy atmosphere tested every student's willpower from the moment they entered. Des took the name Bane when he joined the academy. It had been his father's cruel nickname for him, calling Des the bane of my existence, which was perfect for someone ready to leave his past behind. The teachers right away approved because a Sith name helped separate them from their weak past. From that moment forward, Des was completely dead to everyone at the academy. Only Bane remained. Bane lived in a dorm with other students who constantly watched each other, always waiting for signs of weakness. The competition was really fierce, since students always competed for the master's attention through fighting skill. Sirak, a male Zabrak, was the academy's top student and made sure everyone knew it. So Bane quickly realized that showing any weakness here meant right away losing status and opportunity. Training began before dawn, with intense fighting practice in dueling rings. The instructor was Kasim, a Twi'lek blade master whose skill was legendary. He used a double-bladed lightsaber that he spun so fast it looked like a solid disc of light. Plus, he could easily defeat multiple students at once while also correcting their technique. He skillfully showed all 7 classic forms of lightsaber combat, making each one look completely easy. Meanwhile, Bane learned these forms with amazing speed, understanding not just the moves but also the ideas behind each form. Yet Bane's training suddenly took a terrible turn when he unexpectedly lost his connection to the Force. After killing a student named Foharg in a practice duel, and then realizing he had killed his father through the dark side years ago, overwhelming guilt and doubt completely ate him up. He couldn't touch the Force at all, making him completely useless in combat. The other students constantly made fun of him, while even the masters completely ignored him. His rival Sirak badly beat him in their first major duel, nearly killing him with a crushing defeat. Everything changed when Githany approached him. She was a fallen Jedi who had joined the Brotherhood, both beautiful and deadly. She saw huge potential in Bane that others had completely given up on. In secret, she carefully taught him to embrace his emotions rather than fight them. Under her expert guidance, Bane's power returned even stronger than before. When he faced Sirak again in a formal duel, Bane beat him, but deliberately spared his life, which greatly disappointed Githany. Later, Sirak foolishly attacked Bane in the Academy library with allies. This time, Bane ruthlessly killed him, cutting off the Zabrak's head as Sirak desperately begged for mercy. While other students spent free time either fighting or drinking, Bane constantly studied in the archives. The library contained thousands of years of built-up Sith knowledge. However, most students completely ignored these dusty books and holocrons because they wrongly thought study was weakness. Meanwhile, Bane clearly saw it as a chance to gain huge power through understanding. Lord Cordis, the Academy's headmaster, found Bane reading forbidden texts about ancient Sith lords one night. Cordis was really ancient himself since his body was badly withered by decades of dark side corruption. His skin was yellow and cracked, with deeply sunken eyes that seemed to pierce through anyone who met his gaze. Plus, his appearance naturally commanded fear and respect from all who served under him. Cordis right away noticed that Bane was reading texts that directly went against Lord Khan's teachings. These books clearly talked about individual Dark Lords ruling with total power, not councils of equals. When Cordis saw Bane's obvious interest in these dangerous ideas, he right away ordered him to stop. The ancient archives were strictly off-limits because such knowledge would certainly bring trouble to the Brotherhood. But Bane simply couldn't let go of what he had learned. The texts mentioned that Naga Sadow had coordinated huge fleets through illusions and battle meditation, while Exar Kun single-handedly corrupted whole groups of Jedi. They were clearly individuals with terrible power, not committee members just voting on decisions. Despite Cortus's stern warnings, Bane stubbornly continued his research in secret. In the deepest archives, he eventually found references to a holocron created by Darth Revan that was supposedly located on the planet Lahan. The text claimed this holocron contained knowledge that could completely change the Sith forever. The Killing Fields of Ruusan. Bane's education finally reached its peak when his growing doubts about the Brotherhood's ideas became too strong to ignore. During private talks with other students, and even Qasim, he repeatedly questioned how the Sith could possibly be equal when the dark side itself was basically about control. The ancient Sith had kept clear rankings that let them conquer. Meanwhile, this Brotherhood seemed pathetically weak by comparison. Within just a few days, Bane decided he had learned all he could from the Academy. He boldly claimed the forbidden title of Darth for himself and officially became Darth Bane. Then, right away, left Korriban to seek Revan's holocron on Lahan. He brazenly stole Lord Cortus's personal ship for the journey. Lahan was completely hidden by electromagnetic storms that made flying extremely dangerous. When Bane finally arrived on Lahan's surface through the deadly storms, he found a world of black beaches and ancient ruins. The Rakata had ruled the entire galaxy from here 25,000 years ago. Plus, their dead machines still eerily dotted the landscape. However, Bane definitely wasn't alone on Lahan. Lord Khan had specifically sent Qasim to kill him because he clearly saw Bane as a threat to the Brotherhood's unity. Githany had sensed Bane's location through their force bond and informed Khan, who then dispatched the Twi'lek Master with clear orders. When Qasim's ship finally landed on Lahan's black beaches, he could strongly feel Bane's presence like a blazing beacon of dark power coming from the Temple of the Ancients. The temple itself was truly a monument to forgotten power. The entrance was flanked by statues of ancient warriors whose faces were worn completely smooth by thousands of years of storms. Qasim moved carefully through the temple's corridors like a shadow, his footsteps absolutely silent on the ancient stone. He had personally trained Bane in every form of lightsaber combat. Now that knowledge would be turned against his former student. The irony wasn't lost on him, since the Brotherhood's greatest weapon master was now hunting the Brotherhood's greatest rebel. He finally found Bane in the temple's central chamber, standing calmly before a massive stone altar where Revan's holocron floated mysteriously in a column of blue light. Bane didn't even turn when Qasim entered. He had clearly sensed his former teacher approaching from the moment he landed on the planet. Qasim formally announced that Lord Khan commanded Bane's immediate death because he had completely betrayed everything the Brotherhood stood for. Bane finally turned around, and Qasim was genuinely shocked by his transformation. His former student's eyes burned with intense yellow fire, while dark veins visibly pulsed beneath his skin. The weeks spent on Lahan studying Revan's teachings had fundamentally changed him. Bane coldly replied that the Brotherhood actually stood for nothing. They had completely forgotten what it truly meant to be Sith. They pathetically shared power like beggars sharing scraps when they should be boldly taking it all. Without any further words, Qasim immediately ignited his weapon. The twin crimson blades hummed menacingly to life, spinning elegantly in the opening moves from Form 7 called Juyo, the most aggressive of all lightsaber forms. Bane promptly responded by igniting his own blade, naturally falling into the Gem-So stance Qasim had repeatedly drilled into him years ago. Their first exchange was almost impossibly fast for the eye to follow. Qasim's staff spun in deadly arcs, while Bane smoothly blocked with simple movements, always using his greater strength to turn aside the attacks. They moved gracefully through the temple chamber in a deadly dance, each carefully testing the other's defenses. Meanwhile, the ancient columns around them now bore fresh scars from glancing lightsaber strikes. For several intense minutes, they fought as complete equals, master and former student locked in perfect combat. Their blades met hundreds of times, repeatedly creating showers of sparks that brilliantly lit up the Dark Temple. Neither could successfully gain a decisive advantage. Qasim's extensive experience and technique perfectly matched against Bane's power and youth. Then, Qasim suddenly did something Bane had never witnessed before. With a subtle twist of his wrists, he smoothly separated his double-bladed weapon into two individual lightsabers. Suddenly, Bane faced an opponent expertly using Jarkai, the dual-blade technique that Qasim had deliberately kept secret, even from his best students. The change in the fighting style was immediately overwhelming. Where before, Qasim's attacks had come in relatively predictable patterns dictated by the staff's configuration, now strikes came from completely impossible angles, high and low perfectly at the same time, thrust and slash in the identical motion, one blade defending while the other simultaneously attacked. Bane had absolutely never trained against this style because Qasim had deliberately made sure of that by keeping this crucial advantage hidden for years. Bane's single blade simply couldn't cover all the angles, so cuts began appearing on his arms and legs. Not deep enough to cripple, but certainly enough to slow him down. Qasim stated between strikes that Bane was indeed his greatest student. However, he was ultimately still just a student. Bane found himself desperately pushed against a massive stone column with both of Qasim's blades locked firmly against his own. This was Qasim completely unleashed, fighting not to teach, but specifically to kill. Nevertheless, as Qasim pressed his apparent advantage, Bane actually smiled. He told Qasim that he had indeed taught him blade work, yet Revan had importantly taught him true power. Realizing he absolutely couldn't win through lightsaber combat alone, Bane desperately reached out with the Force. Not directly at Qasim, since the weapons master was far too skilled at blocking Force attacks. Instead, Bane channeled all his rage and power directly into the temple's structure itself. The ancient stone that had stood for 25,000 years suddenly began to groan and crack. Qasim immediately felt the shift. The floor violently trembled beneath his feet, while dust heavily rained from the ceiling. The entire temple was catastrophically coming apart. Qasim urgently shouted that Bane would kill them both. Bane calmly replied with just one word while already backing toward the exit. "Just you." The first column fell with a sound exactly like thunder. Tons of black stone violently crashed down where Qasim had been standing just a moment before. The weapons master barely rolled aside since his incredible reflexes miraculously saved him. The ceiling itself began to completely collapse as massive blocks of stone fell like meteors. Qasim desperately tried to reach the exit with his twin blades frantically cutting through falling debris, yet Bane definitely wasn't finished. He poured even more power into his destruction, actually feeling the temple's foundation crack. Qasim made it halfway to the door before a massive section of ceiling fell directly above him. He desperately raised both lightsabers, frantically trying to cut through it, but there was simply far too much mass. The master, who had carefully taught Bane everything about lightsaber combat, died, brutally crushed beneath the rubble of a temple that had proudly stood since before the Republic existed. His final thought was one of bitter recognition, because he had indeed trained his student too well, just definitely not in the ways he had intended. With Qasim finally dead, Bane could at last claim his prize. Inside Revan's temple, he discovered the holocron he had been desperately seeking. When activated, Revan's image appeared and seemed remarkably alive. The message was devastatingly clear. The Sith consistently kept failing because far too many of them existed at once. The dark side was exactly like a river, so the more people who desperately tried to drink from it, the less each person could actually get. Revan had a smart solution called the Rule of Two, where only two Sith should ever exist at any time. A master to fully hold power, and an apprentice to desperately want it. When the apprentice eventually got strong enough, they would kill the master and take their place, then carefully train their own apprentice. In addition to that crucial information, the holocron contained huge knowledge of ancient weapons and tactics, including specific details about the thought bomb. Bane spent several weeks on Lehon, methodically studying everything in Revan's holocron. His understanding of the Force dramatically deepened beyond anything the Brotherhood ever taught. His eyes glowed permanently yellow from constantly channeling so much dark-side energy. He was definitely no longer just Bane, but had truly become Darth Bane, boldly claiming the ancient title of Dark Lord that the Brotherhood had foolishly diluted by giving it to everyone. Some among the Sith truly believed Bane might actually be the Sithari, a predicted figure who would completely destroy the Sith and then make them stronger. The prophecy said this chosen one would lead the Sith through destruction to perfection. Meanwhile, Bane fully embraced this destiny because clearly he saw himself as the one who would save the dark side by destroying those who had weakened it. Meanwhile, on Ruusan, the war had decisively turned against the Brotherhood. The Jedi Army of Light, led by Lord Hoth, had consistently won victory after victory. The Sith Lords were desperately deserting daily, frantically running to the unknown regions rather than face inevitable defeat. Also, Lord Khan had grown increasingly desperate and paranoid, constantly turning on his own followers and continuously ranting about traitors everywhere. When Bane finally arrived on Ruusan, he found the Brotherhood on the absolute verge of collapse. Only about 100 Sith Lords remained of the thousands who had originally started the war. They were completely desperate, literally starving, and willing to try absolutely anything. Upon arriving at the Brotherhood's camp, Bane was immediately confronted by Lord Cordis. Cordis eagerly offered to support Bane, believing he might seize leadership from Khan. Bane coldly told him he had come not to lead, but to destroy the Brotherhood, then brutally executed Cordis with the Force. Afterward, Bane confidently presented himself to the remaining Sith as their salvation. First, Bane impressively showed his power by leading them in a devastating darkside ritual. The remaining Sith Lords were understandably skeptical when he gathered them in a circle on a hill overlooking the battlefield. Yet when Bane actually began the ritual, even the strongest doubters immediately felt the power building. Bane forcefully commanded them to join their hatred with his. He told them to stop thinking of themselves as individuals. For this crucial moment, they would become one weapon aimed at their enemies. The Sith Lords reluctantly linked hands, forming a circle with Bane at its center. At first, nothing significant happened, except for a few sparks of electricity dancing between their fingers. Then, Bane systematically began drawing on their collective rage, pulling their emotions into himself and dramatically amplifying them. As a result, the air around them grew increasingly thick and oppressive, exactly like the atmosphere before a terrible storm. Lord Kopesh felt it first, as his own anger suddenly magnified 100-fold, rapidly flowing out of him and directly into the growing storm of dark energy. Beside him, Githany audibly gasped as her hatred instantly became fuel for something far greater than herself. Even Lord Khan, usually so carefully controlled, found his emotions being forcibly pulled into the vortex Bane was deliberately creating. The sky above them turned completely black, even though it had been perfectly clear moments before. Down on the plains below, Lord Hoth's Army of Light was confidently advancing in perfect formation. 3,000 Jedi Knights and soldiers marched steadily forward, completely confident in their numerical superiority and recent victories. They had systematically pushed the Sith back for weeks, so this seemed like just another predictable retreat. Victory was finally in reach. Then, Bane dramatically released the storm. The wave of darkside energy violently erupted from the hilltop like a black tsunami. It rolled across the battlefield faster than thought, completely engulfing everything in its path. The front lines of the Army of Light immediately staggered and fell as the energy struck them like a massive physical force, sending soldiers flying helplessly through the air. In that crucial moment, Khan actually feared Bane more than he feared the Jedi. Khan desperately screamed for them to stop and violently broke the circle, instantly severing the connection. The other Sith Lords stumbled apart, since many immediately collapsed from exhaustion. Meanwhile, the storm above completely dissipated immediately as the built-up energy dispersed harmlessly into the atmosphere. A young Jedi Knight who had been violently knocked down by the initial wave looked up in complete confusion as the attack simply stopped. The Army of Light had taken casualties with perhaps 100 dead or wounded from the opening assault, but absolutely nothing like what Bane had originally intended. Therefore, Lord Hoth quickly ordered his forces to pull back and regroup because he was completely uncertain of what had just happened. Over the hilltop, several Sith Lords had completely collapsed from the strain. 2 had actually died since their bodies simply couldn't handle the tremendous amount of dark side energy that had violently flowed through them. Lord Khan himself was on his hands and knees and desperately gasping for breath. Nevertheless, Bane stood tall at the center, with his eyes glowing like twin suns. Bane coldly told the surviving Sith that was exactly what they could have accomplished if Khan hadn't pathetically broken the ritual. He stated their cowardice had directly cost them victory. The partial success definitely impressed, but also deeply disturbed Lord Khan. Bane had clearly proven that unified Sith power could actually work, though it also dramatically showed how much stronger Bane had become during his absence. Furthermore, the other Sith Lords looked at Bane with an obvious mixture of awe and fear, since this was power completely beyond what most of them had ever imagined possible. Lord Khan was genuinely impressed, but also deeply suspicious. Bane's near success clearly proved that unified Sith power could definitely work, but it also dramatically showed how much stronger Bane had become during his absence. Still, with the war going so catastrophically badly, Khan had absolutely no choice except to accept Bane's help. Bane subsequently sent Khan detailed instructions for creating a thought bomb, which was a devastating weapon that could completely destroy every Force user within its range. He specifically told them the weapon would destroy only the Jedi and permanently trap their souls in agony forever. However, he deliberately lied that they all must absolutely channel their power together in perfect unity or it simply wouldn't work. This was completely a lie. The thought bomb would actually kill everyone, including both Jedi and Sith alike. Also, Bane definitely knew Khan was far too desperate to realize the trap. The ritual to create the thought bomb was absolutely horrific. Khan forcefully required every remaining Sith to contribute power, and those who went completely mad from the strain were brutally executed by his enforcers. Githany, who had loyally followed the Brotherhood to Ruusan, suddenly realized what Bane had actually done. Before the final battle could begin, Lord Khan secretly sent Githany to assassinate Bane on Ambria. She desperately tried to poison him by seductively kissing him with Synox-coated lips. The poison would definitely kill within hours, yet Bane quickly realized the symptoms. The toxin burned painfully through his veins as he stumbled away from her shocking betrayal. Bane desperately tried to use the dark side to sustain himself by brutally killing a family of scavengers and greedily absorbing their life force, but it simply wasn't enough. He finally collapsed near death on Ambria. Desperate, he painfully dragged himself to the healer Caleb's cottage and ruthlessly threatened Caleb's daughter to force the healer to cure him. Caleb reluctantly purged the Synox from Bane's system using ancient healing techniques and force abilities, ultimately saving his life. Bane left the healer alive, though the threat to his family remained clear. By the time Bane finally recovered, the final battle had already begun. Lord Hoth bravely led 100 brave Jedi volunteers directly into the caves where the Brotherhood had desperately taken shelter. They fully expected desperate resistance, but were completely ready to end the war once and for all. In the deepest chamber, Khan and his remaining followers stood ominously around the thought bomb, which was a sphere of pure darkness that literally hurt to look at. The Sith Lords were continuously chanting in the ancient language, desperately pouring their hatred into the weapon. Lord Khopesh was notably not among them. He had finally realized the complete madness of Khan's plan and wisely escaped the caves at the last possible moment. Outside, mortally wounded from earlier battles, he unexpectedly encountered the Jedi Lord Farfalla. In exchange for honestly revealing the thought bomb plot, Khopesh boldly demanded an honorable death in combat. Farfalla respectfully obliged, granting the Purple Twi'lek Sith Lord a warrior's end just moments before the catastrophe. Bane carefully positioned himself far from the caves, since he knew precisely when detonation would occur. When he finally felt the thought bomb reaching critical mass, he was already several kilometers away. Behind him, Khan desperately screamed and catastrophically released the thought bomb. The explosion was completely beyond description. Every Force user within 5 kilometers instantly ceased to exist. Their bodies turned to ash immediately. Yet worse, their souls were permanently trapped in eternal agony. The explosion left a terrible wound in the Force itself, which was a place where reality was permanently damaged. Additionally, Lord Hoth and Lord Khan died together as their eternal war finally ended in mutual destruction. Githany too was completely consumed, since she had been in the caves when the bomb detonated. But there was actually a witness, a young girl named Rain who had been on Ruusan during the battle as a child soldier with the Army of Light. She was only 10 years old, originally brought to the war by her cousins, who mistakenly thought her Force sensitivity could help the Jedi cause. Instead, she would witness unspeakable horrors that would completely shape her into something terrible after the thought bomb detonated. Rain had been approximately half a kilometer from the caves, close enough to clearly feel the psychic shockwave, yet fortunately far enough to survive. She had been peacefully sitting with her only friend, a native creature called a bouncer, which was a telepathic green-furred orb that gently floated through the air. The bouncers were remarkably peaceful creatures who exclusively communicated through emotions and images rather than words. This particular one, whom Rain lovingly called La, had become her devoted companion during the terrible months of war. As the thought bomb's energy violently erupted outward, Rain instinctively created a protective force shield around herself and La. She didn't consciously know how she did it, since the power simply flowed through her in automatic response to mortal danger. The shield miraculously held against the initial blast, successfully protecting them both from instant annihilation. Nevertheless, she painfully felt every death through the Force as thousands of souls desperately screamed while they were brutally ripped from their bodies and permanently trapped in eternal torment. The experience nearly completely destroyed her mind. She immediately fell to her knees, desperately clutching her head as the overwhelming mental shock washed over her. Every Jedi and Sith who died in that horrible moment, she felt their final thoughts, including their absolute terror. La immediately wrapped his furry form around her, desperately trying to shield her mind from the worst of it by continuously humming a wordless song of comfort through their mental connection. 2 Jedi scouts found them approximately an hour later. They were young knights, barely older than 20, who had been positioned far from the battle and survived by pure chance. They approached extremely cautiously with lightsabers drawn because they absolutely couldn't comprehend what had happened. When they saw Rain, a human child sitting in the complete devastation, they initially felt genuine relief. A survivor, a precious child they could save from this unspeakable horror. Then, they suddenly saw La. One of the Jedi immediately shouted for her to get away from it. To them, the bouncer looked exactly like some kind of dark side aberration, a dangerous creature of pure energy mysteriously hovering near a child. They didn't remotely understand that bouncers were completely peaceful, or that La had been desperately protecting Rain. All they could see was a potential threat. Rain desperately screamed no and immediately threw herself between the Jedi and her friend. She frantically exclaimed that La wasn't dangerous because he was actually her friend who had saved her. However, the Jedi simply weren't listening. Suddenly, everyone looked like a potential enemy. Therefore, the second Jedi quickly raised his hand, forcefully using the Force to pull Rain away from what he incorrectly thought was danger. She flew violently backward, slamming hard into a broken stone wall with enough force to completely knock the breath from her lungs. That was precisely when they struck. Both Jedi attacked simultaneously as their lightsabers viciously cut through La's physical form. The bouncer's death definitely wasn't quick. His green-furred body writhed painfully as the energy wounds systematically disrupted his being. He desperately reached out toward Rain with one small appendage, sending her a final pulse of emotion, which, surprisingly, wasn't anger or fear, but profound sadness and love. Then, he simply collapsed as his precious life was extinguished like a candle in the wind. Something fundamental inside Rain completely shattered. The scream that violently erupted from her small form wasn't entirely human. It was genuinely the sound of innocence dying and of a child's soul completely breaking under the unbearable weight of loss and rage. As a result, the ground around her immediately cracked in a spiderweb pattern as dark-side energy uncontrollably poured out of her without conscious direction. Her eyes, which had previously been brown, instantly turned yellow as sulfur. The two Jedi barely had enough time to realize their terrible mistake before Rain's power violently struck them. They were forcefully lifted into the air by invisible hands, while their bodies painfully contorted in ways that bones absolutely weren't meant to bend. She wasn't consciously using any technique or learned skill, since this was pure, raw emotion violently given form through the Force. She desperately wanted them to hurt exactly like she hurt. She needed them to feel precisely what it was like to lose absolutely everything. The first Jedi's neck suddenly snapped with an audible crack as his head was twisted completely backward. Meanwhile, the second Jedi desperately tried to speak, perhaps to apologize or beg, yet Rain instantly crushed his windpipe with a mere thought. Part of her, which was still a 10-year-old girl, was genuinely horrified by what she was doing. However, that innocent part was rapidly drowning under a devastating tsunami of grief and fury. When both Jedi were finally dead, their bodies dropped lifelessly to the ground like broken dolls. Rain stood there motionless among 3 corpses, including 2 Jedi she had brutally killed, and the broken body of the only friend she had left in the entire world. The dark side energy gradually faded away, leaving her feeling completely hollow and cold. She didn't cry at all, because she was utterly beyond tears now. That was precisely how Bane found her 20 minutes later, standing perfectly still among the dead and blankly staring at nothing with those sulphurous yellow eyes. He approached extremely carefully, since he immediately recognized the signs of someone who had just violently discovered their true power in the worst possible way. Rain stated without looking at Bane that they had killed him. She quietly explained that La never hurt anyone because he just desperately wanted to help. Bane carefully studied the scene, including the dead Jedi whose bodies were violently twisted and broken, plus the leftover dark energy still visibly clinging to the child like smoke. He had originally come to Ruusan to destroy the Brotherhood, yet he had unexpectedly found something far more valuable. This girl clearly had the kind of power that appeared only once in a generation. More importantly, she had already taken the first step into darkness. Therefore, the Jedi had essentially done his work for him. Bane calmly told her that the Jedi always destroy what they don't understand. They constantly claim to be guardians of peace, but they inevitably bring only death. She had finally seen their true nature now. Rain finally looked directly at him, and Bane saw not merely a child, but a potential weapon of absolutely unlimited possibility. The grief in her eyes was already visibly hardening into something much colder and infinitely more dangerous. She had successfully killed 2 trained Jedi in a single moment of pure rage. With proper training, she could definitely become something completely unprecedented. Rain quietly asked what she was supposed to do now. Everyone was completely dead, while La was permanently gone. She had absolutely nowhere to go. Bane smoothly extended his hand and told her to come with him. He could definitely teach her to properly use this power. He could specifically show her how to ensure she never lost anyone again. The Jedi cruelly took her friend from her, so he would thoroughly teach her to take absolutely everything from them. Rain looked at his extended hand for a long, uncertain moment. She could clearly feel the darkness powerfully radiating from him, yet it didn't actually frighten her. Nothing could possibly frighten her anymore, since she had already experienced the absolute worst thing imaginable. She had permanently lost the only being who had ever shown her unconditional kindness. When she finally took Bane's hand, her fate was completely sealed. Yet Bane didn't immediately take her away. First, he gave Rain a ruthless test by ordering her to escape Ruusan alone and meet him on Onderon in 10 days. Only the truly strong deserve to become Sith. The child miraculously survived against all odds and successfully reunited with him, proving Bane's instincts completely correct. The child named Rain effectively died in that crucial moment, even though her body lived on. What remained would eventually become Darth Zana, one of the most feared Sith Lords in galactic history. Master and Apprentice. After Rain passed his initial test, Bane immediately took her to Ambria, a world completely poisoned by ancient Sith experiments. The planet's atmosphere was dangerously toxic to most life, while its surface remained completely barren, except for Lake Nath, whose waters literally drove people mad. Moreover, the powerful dark side energy there would speed up her training, while keeping them hidden from any surviving Jedi. That complete transformation would take many years of hard training and considerable pain, but for now, she was simply a broken child with unimaginable power and absolutely nothing left to lose. The galaxy enthusiastically celebrated the Sith's apparent extinction after Ruusan. The Jedi Order officially declared total victory and immediately began dismantling their military forces. They happily returned to being peacekeepers instead of warriors. Plus that major change, this was precisely what Bane wanted, since a completely complacent enemy who incorrectly believed the threat was permanently gone would be easier to destroy. Bane firmly told Rain her old name was completely dead. She was Zana now, and she would officially become his apprentice in the rule of two. One day, she would inevitably kill him and take his place, then train her own apprentice. This cycle would continuously repeat until the Sith were finally strong enough to completely destroy the Jedi forever. Yet Zana was frightened and conflicted at first. She was still only 10 years old and traumatized by everything she had witnessed. Therefore, Bane didn't deliberately use physical torture because he wisely knew that only created lasting resentment. Instead, he systematically showed her the harsh truth about power through practical demonstrations. He carefully taught her to observe nature's inherent brutality, where the strong consistently consume the weak without any hesitation. Furthermore, Bane thoroughly explained this was the galaxy's fundamental law. The Republic constantly pretended otherwise, yet their supposed peace came entirely from military strength. Meanwhile, the Jedi continuously claimed to serve justice, but their justice ultimately came from their lightsabers. The first year of training specifically focused on systematically breaking down everything Zana previously believed. Bane repeatedly demonstrated the harsh realities of survival, gradually making her understand that weakness inevitably invited destruction. He deliberately forced her to feel deaths through the Force whenever they eliminated threats to their secrecy. Furthermore, he consistently taught her that compassion was an expensive luxury the Sith absolutely couldn't afford. Over the following difficult months, Bane methodically taught Zana to channel her fear into anger, then her anger into usable power. He made her study ancient Sith magic on Ambria and orchestrate intrigues to harden her resolve, continuously pushing her body and mind to their limits. When she struggled with the demanding training, he would use the Force to help her continue. Thus, pain gradually became her constant companion, not as punishment, but specifically as a tool for growth. However, Bane's teaching went far beyond just Force powers. He thoroughly educated her in history, systematically showing her how every government originally rose through violence and continuously maintained power through fear. The Republic proudly claimed to be different, yet they had ruthlessly destroyed countless civilizations that simply wouldn't join them. Furthermore, the Jedi consistently acted as their enforcers, brutally crushing any group that dared challenge their monopoly on Force use. Bane constantly tested her resolve in deliberately harsh ways. He repeatedly taught her that the rule of two absolutely demanded she eventually desire his death and actively crave his power. Compassion was an undeniable weakness. Only through continuous conflict could the Sith properly evolve and grow stronger. After 3 years, Bane finally decided Zana needed practical, real-world experience. They left Ambria and systematically began traveling the Outer Rim, carefully taking different identities. They convincingly posed as merchants, nobles, and scholars, while methodically gathering information about the galaxy's current state. Additionally, this gave them perfect cover to systematically search for Sith artifacts and forbidden knowledge. During their extensive travels, they had to maintain absolute secrecy about their true nature. Any Jedi who accidentally discovered them had to be completely eliminated. Meanwhile, Xana gradually developed incredible skill with Sith sorcery during this time. She could expertly create illusions so completely real that victims literally died from imaginary wounds. Besides that remarkable ability, she thoroughly understood subtlety and manipulation far better than Bane ever could. Nevertheless, they absolutely had to ensure the Jedi truly believed the Sith were permanently extinct. When a Jedi search party eventually came to Ambria following her cousin Darovit's discovery by Johun Othon, Xana brilliantly orchestrated a perfect deception. Darovit had miraculously survived Ruusan and was subsequently brought to Coruscant to testify about Bane and Xana. But before he could deliver full testimony, Xana cleverly intercepted him at the Jedi Temple while carefully disguised as a scholar researching Orbalisk removal techniques. She quickly took him to Ambria before the Council could properly act on his knowledge. When the Jedi finally arrived on Ambria, Xana expertly used her Sith sorcery to completely drive Darovit insane and cleverly presented him to the Jedi as the last Sith Lord. The Jedi immediately killed Darovit because they genuinely believed they had successfully eliminated the final Sith threat and incorrectly concluded the Sith were permanently gone forever. This incredibly clever manipulation perfectly ensured Bane and Xana could continue operating in complete secrecy. 5 years into her intensive training, Bane systematically began teaching her the deeper philosophy of the Rule of Two. It definitely wasn't just about limiting numbers, but fundamentally about evolution. Each apprentice absolutely had to be stronger than their master, or the Sith would inevitably stagnate. Moreover, the constant conflict between master and apprentice deliberately kept both sharp, effectively preventing the dangerous comfort that had completely destroyed the Brotherhood. Their relationship was undeniably complex and deeply twisted. Bane was deliberately training someone to eventually kill him, while Xana was carefully learning from someone she would ultimately have to murder. But this inherent tension was precisely what the Rule of Two fundamentally required. Furthermore, it successfully prevented the inevitable stagnation that had destroyed previous Sith orders. During this crucial period, Bane also systematically refined his own philosophy. He clearly realized the Rule of Two needed much more than just the basic structure. There absolutely had to be reliable ways to preserve knowledge between generations, effective methods to stay permanently hidden from the Jedi, and comprehensive plans that could successfully span centuries. Thus, he immediately began creating holocrons of his own, carefully recording absolutely everything he had learned for future Sith. After exploring ancient Sith worlds and studying forbidden texts that mentioned Orbalisks as parasitic creatures that fed on dark-side energy while forming living armor, Bane traveled to Duxun seeking Frida Nad's holocron. On Onderon's notorious Demon Moon, Bane eventually found Frida Nad's tomb, where he expected to find the ancient knowledge he sought. The search for immortality. Bane deliberately entered Frida Nad's tomb on Duxun, specifically searching for a holocron. When he entered the sealed chamber within the tomb, dormant Orbalisks unexpectedly swarmed him. They violently attached himself with teeth that painfully burrowed through his skin and directly into his bones. The pain was absolutely beyond anything he had previously experienced. Moreover, once permanently attached, the Orbalisks could absolutely never be removed without fatally killing their host. The complete transformation took considerable time as Bane lay screaming in the cave while more Orbalisks continuously attached themselves. They systematically covered his torso, arms, and legs, gradually forming overlapping plates of living armor. But they aggressively began spreading toward his head, so Bane had to desperately use every bit of his considerable will to prevent them from covering his face completely. When the unbearable agony finally ended, Bane had genuinely become something more than human. The Orbalisk armor could successfully deflect lightsabers and completely absorb blaster bolts. The creatures continuously fed on his dark side energy, while simultaneously making him significantly stronger. Furthermore, the constant, excruciating pain they caused consistently gave him something to channel into additional power, making his force abilities even more devastating. Nevertheless, the Orbalisks definitely brought terrible problems. They multiplied constantly, aggressively trying to cover his entire body. Bane had to continuously use the Force to desperately keep them from spreading to his face and hands. Moreover, they voraciously fed on his emotions, making his anger increasingly harder to control. His thoughts became progressively more violent, so he had to carefully meditate for hours each day just to barely maintain his sanity. When he finally returned to Xana, she was genuinely horrified by his shocking transformation. The Orbalisks made him look exactly like a monster, completely covered in living armor that visibly pulsed with each heartbeat. Bane calmly explained that everything inevitably kills you slowly. Yet until the Orbalisks finally did, they made him practically invincible. This was fundamentally the Sith way, because it was taking power wherever you find it, completely regardless of the cost. He deliberately made Xana carefully study the Orbalisks closely, thoroughly understanding their biology and potential weaknesses. But he specifically wanted her to understand that power inevitably always came with a significant price. During this particular period, a Sith cultist named Hetton unexpectedly sought out Xana. He boldly claimed to have extensive knowledge of ancient Sith artifacts, including the precise location of Balia Darzu's holocron. Xana cleverly pretended to ally with him, since she immediately knew the information could prove extremely valuable. But Hetton foolishly believed he could successfully curry favor by eliminating Bane, so he hastily assembled a team of 8 elite Umbaran shadow assassins specifically trained in lightsaber combat. The coordinated attack came at Caleb's cottage on Ambria. 8 dark side warriors simultaneously surrounded Bane with their lightsabers igniting in perfect unison, but they had absolutely no idea what they actually faced. Bane's Orbalisk armor effortlessly turned aside their strikes while he systematically moved through them like death itself. In less than 60 seconds, all 8 assassins lay dead as their bodies were violently scattered across the battlefield. Meanwhile, Hetton himself desperately tried to flee, yet Bane easily caught him and brutally snapped his neck with a single hand. Xana cleverly used the information from Hetton to strategically lead them to new sources of power. The Orbalisks were clearly a temporary solution at best, but his primary focus gradually became finding knowledge of essence transfer, which was the legendary ability to permanently move one's consciousness into another body. 20 years after initially taking Xana as his apprentice, Bane noticed something extremely disturbing. She had clearly grown powerful enough to successfully challenge him, yet mysteriously showed no ambition to actually try. She seemed strangely content to indefinitely remain the apprentice, continuously learning but never seeking to surpass. Moreover, this fundamentally violated the Rule of Two's essential principle, since the apprentice absolutely must hunger for the master's power. Around this particular time, they strategically adopted more permanent false identities. Bane and Xana convincingly posed as wealthy merchant siblings on Ciutric 4, where he was Sep Omic, and she was his sister Alia Omic. They skillfully used these identities to systematically infiltrate high society and carefully gather information. Furthermore, they successfully established contacts throughout the Republic that would reliably serve future Sith for generations. The final confrontation. To thoroughly test Xana's commitment, Bane deliberately began showing obvious weakness. He would purposefully stumble during combat training, intentionally leave openings in his defense, and convincingly pretend the Orbalisk's pain affected him far more than it actually did. But Xana mysteriously never took advantage. Moreover, she definitely seemed to be patiently waiting for something, though Bane absolutely couldn't figure out what. The situation became significantly more complex years later, when Bane unexpectedly discovered Xana had secretly made contact with a Force user named Set Hearth. This clearly violated the Rule of Two, which strictly demanded only 2 Sith at any time. But besides that concerning development, it strongly suggested Xana was definitely planning something behind his back. Bane angrily confronted her about flagrantly breaking their most sacred law. Though physically scarred and still noticeably weak from losing the Orbalisks years before, his fury was absolutely undeniable. Xana calmly explained she had simply learned from him to always think strategically ahead. When she eventually killed him, she would immediately need an apprentice ready. But Set Hearth ultimately proved to be a complete coward who fled before any actual confrontation occurred. A group of 5 Jedi had unfortunately discovered their presence on Tython years earlier, where Bane had been carefully searching for Balia Darzu's holocron. The Jedi had meticulously followed leads from various information about Sith activity. When they suddenly attacked, both Bane and Xana desperately fought together against them. But this unexpected battle would prove extremely costly for both Master and Apprentice. The battle was incredibly fierce against 5 Jedi, including Valenthine Farfalla and Johun Othon. Bane's Orbalisk armor successfully protected him from most lightsaber strikes, yet one Jedi possessed a cortosis weave blade that could actually damage the creatures. Several Orbalisks got their protective shells cracked completely open. Moreover, Bane himself successfully managed to kill 2 Jedi before the damaged parasites began rapidly releasing toxins into his bloodstream. Xana efficiently finished off the remaining 3 Jedi by cleverly using her sorcery to completely trap them in nightmarish illusions while she systematically cut them down. Nevertheless, the hard-won victory was extremely costly. The damaged Orbalisks were continuously releasing a slow poison that would inevitably kill Bane within days. As the deadly poison burned through his veins, Xana desperately brought him back to Ambria. She quickly found the healer Caleb, and through serious threats against his daughter, forcefully compelled him to remove the Orbalisks and treat the poison. After successfully healing Bane, Caleb demanded they send a message to the Jedi as part of their deal. The process very nearly killed Bane. Xana killed Caleb to silence any witnesses, though she had arranged for the Jedi to be alerted as Caleb requested. Nevertheless, both clearly knew that their final confrontation would inevitably arrive eventually. After the Orbalisks were finally removed, Bane desperately sought one final source of ultimate power. A treacherous journey to Prakoth in the deep core nearly completely destroyed his ship from violent gravity anomalies. But Prakoth itself was an ancient fortress world with massive citadels that had stood completely empty for thousands of years. Darth Anadu's fortress was an imposing black pyramid that continuously radiated darkside energy so powerfully it killed all plant life for miles around. Inside, Bane had to violently fight through Anadu's cultists, who incredibly still guarded the tomb after countless centuries. They were absolute fanatics who had unnaturally extended their lives through forbidden dark rituals. Moreover, they viciously attacked with ancient weapons and mysterious force powers Bane had never previously seen. Bane systematically fought through them all and eventually found not just a holocron, but Anadu's actual mummified corpse, which was perfectly preserved by Sith alchemy. When Bane carefully activated the holocron, Anadu's spirit suddenly appeared as not merely an image, but the actual consciousness of the ancient Sith Lord. Besides that shocking development, Anadu seemingly offered to teach Bane essence transfer, the legendary ability to permanently possess another person's body when your own inevitably failed. But as Bane eagerly learned the technique, Anadu suddenly tried to possess him. The mental battle was incredibly fierce, since it was fought entirely within their minds. Anadu possessed centuries of accumulated experience, yet Bane had rigorously trained his will through decades of pain and constant struggle. Furthermore, he cleverly turned Anadu's own technique directly against him, effectively trapping the ancient spirit and ultimately destroying it completely. This crucial knowledge changed absolutely everything for Bane. He suddenly realized he could potentially live forever by systematically taking new bodies when his current one eventually failed. Nevertheless, the absolutely ideal host would necessarily need to be young, incredibly strong in the Force, and extensively trained in Sith techniques. Someone exactly like Xana. Moreover, this shocking realization added a completely new dimension to their already complex relationship. On the third night after his exhausting return from Prakoth, as Bane slowly regained his strength, Xana suddenly struck. She didn't formally announce her challenge or give any warning. She simply ignited her double-bladed lightsaber and viciously attacked where Bane lay seemingly weakened. But Bane had actually been waiting for this exact moment. Despite his genuinely weakened state, he quickly rolled aside and successfully blocked her strike with his own blade. Master and apprentice finally faced each other with absolute deadly intent after 20 years together. They intimately knew each other's techniques perfectly, since they had extensively trained together for 2 decades. Xana's double-bladed weapon continuously spun in defensive patterns while she patiently waited for openings. But Bane desperately attacked with desperate strength because he clearly knew his body was still recovering. Additionally, the battle definitely wasn't just physical, but deeply philosophical. Bane angrily gasped between strikes that Xana had waited far too long. She should have killed him years ago when she first had the chance. Now she had grown comfortable instead of hungry for power. But Xana remained focused on her goal, knowing that she had learned everything he could teach. His knowledge, his power, his mistakes, all belonged to her now. He had taught her patience, so now he would die from his own lesson. As they desperately fought, Bane dramatically revealed his ultimate plan. He absolutely wouldn't just passively let her kill him. He possessed the secret of essence transfer. When his body inevitably failed, he would simply take hers. She had unknowingly trained for 20 years to ultimately become his next host. But the physical battle violently ended when Xana expertly summoned writhing tendrils of pure darkness from Ambria's poisoned ground. These tendrils viciously tore into Bane and severely wounded him as he helplessly collapsed to the ground. As his body finally fell, Bane's spirit dramatically erupted from his dying flesh and aggressively invaded Xana's mind.
Whoa.
The real battle had actually just begun. Inside Xana's consciousness, they desperately fought with pure will, intimately knew every corner of Xana's thoughts, since he had carefully shaped them since she was merely 10 years old. Nevertheless, Xana had definitely prepared for this exact possibility. Her mental defenses were incredibly strong because they were methodically built over years of intensive training. She possessed the will to successfully resist, clearly understanding that this was the ultimate test of the rule of two. Moreover, she had been specifically preparing for this crucial moment for years, since she absolutely knew Bane would never simply accept death. Xana forcefully told him within their shared mindscape that he had taught her far too well. He had thoroughly shown her that the Sith absolutely must evolve or die. His time had definitely passed. The rule of two fundamentally demanded that the apprentice ultimately surpass the master, but the mental battle continuously raged in their minds as each consciousness desperately struggled for complete dominance. She completely overwhelmed Bane's essence through sheer determination and the considerable strength he had helped her build. When it finally ended, Xana stood completely alone in the ruins of their battleground, but she would never be truly alone. She immediately noticed a slight tremor in her hand that hadn't been there before, which was exactly the same tremor that Bane had gradually developed in his later years. This naturally made her wonder if she had genuinely won, or if some lingering trace of Bane somehow remained within her. The galaxy had to continuously keep believing the Sith were permanently extinct, while the rule of two secretly continued in absolute secrecy. Moreover, she would definitely need to find her own apprentice very soon, someone to eventually challenge her, exactly as she had successfully challenged Bane. She already had someone specifically in mind, since a Niktoshi assassin named Cognis had recently encountered them during Bane's capture on Doan. The assassin had witnessed Bane's tremendous power firsthand and abandoned her original mission, mysteriously drawn by prophetic visions of the future. Cognis would officially become Darth Cognis, effectively ensuring the rule of two would successfully continue for countless generations. The Sith would permanently remain hidden, consistently growing stronger with each successful passing of power until they were finally ready to completely destroy the Jedi forever. But there was actually another Sith who found a completely different path to immortality, and that was Emperor Valkorion.
So that was the untold tragedy of Darth Bane. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I must say I was really impressed with this entire story, and there are several factors that stood out for me. When Darth Bane joined the Brotherhood of Darkness and studying the archives, he eventually realized what the Brotherhood of Darkness actually stood for. Him learning about the holocron of Darth Revan and leaving the Brotherhood of Darkness eventually, and also becoming face to face with Qasim as well. That battle was fantastic. Also the backstory of Rain, from where her best friend was killed by those two Jedis, and she, using a power that she didn't even know she had, killing those Jedis as well, and meeting Darth Bane in the process. Also her constant training with Darth Bane, eventually becoming his apprentice and going so far as to killing him in the end, was fantastic to learn as well. Also before that, Darth Bane learning about Anadus and Anadus teaching him about the essence transfer, and Darth Bane using that same power against Anadus, killing him in the process as well. Also when Rain, or when she got the new name Xana, killed Darth Bane, she expelled his spirit in the void, and she received an sort of an essence from Darth Bane as well, and she becoming Darth Xana, one of the most feared Sith Lords in the Star Wars universe. The Rule of Two overall, I absolutely loved it, because it explains how you have a Sith Lord and its apprentice, and the apprentice killing the Sith Lord, and the process going on and on and on. This was fantastic. And a word of wisdom for today. As the saying goes, heaven don't come cheap. Have a blessed day further, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.